If you're consistent with content, you'll build an audience. If you learn from people who are teaching this stuff, you will make steps forward. And then, so those principles I've kind of stuck to really, as the years have gone by, because I'm a huge proponent of learning and paying for training and getting mentorship and all of that. So I was just following the breadcrumbs, investing back into what I was doing, and it always worked.
You're listening to The Growth Booth, the show focused on achieving lifestyle freedom through online businesses. Whether you're looking for step-by-step strategies to start building an online business, simple game plans to grow your business, or proven lifestyle freedom frameworks, you are in the right place. Stay tuned and be sure to join the thousands of listeners already in growth mode.
Hey everyone, welcome to episode number 45 of The Growth Booth, where today I'm joined by Ollie Richards, who is the founder of StoryLearning.com, which is an absolutely fascinating business, one that I'm particularly enthusiastic about actually using myself, and you'll find out about what all of that is. But he's also done an amazing job with his marketing. It's a real inspirational story of going from zero to hero in an online business, essentially, where he started things out on his own and has built an amazing business where he's sold hundreds of thousands of books. He's got hundreds of thousands of subscribers that follow him from all around the world. And what he's doing is teaching languages. So, Ollie, thank you so much for taking some time out of your schedule there to join us today.
It's a pleasure, man. Very happy to be here.
So I should give a bit more of the backstory. I actually met Ollie in person, I guess a month or so ago. He was in Buenos Aires and we were introduced by a mutual friend. And turned out that we had a lot more in common than I would have maybe realized. For starters, we were both in Argentina in the early 2000s. I came here for the first time in 2005. I know you almost died in Argentina in 2004. Maybe you could share a little bit about that wild adventure.
Yeah, well, this is really actually the whole backstory to the origin story of story learning, my main business, and it involves a kind of epiphany around languages. So I, at the time, spoke kind of very mediocre Spanish. I've been trying to learn for a while and hadn't really got very far. And then I was traveling around Argentina with some friends, and we ended up in this beautiful place up in the mountains in the north of the country called Irusha, which is thousands of feet high, beautiful mountain village. And
it's pretty hard to get to. I drove there. Must have been about 2006, and I tell you what, I had a pretty sweaty brow as I was cruising down some of those very narrow gravel roads with a 100-meter cliff right next to me, and crazy locals driving up the other way. So I don't know if I could say I had a near-death experience, but driving those roads could definitely result in that. But that wasn't your one anyway.
Yeah, no, just getting there is kind of a near-death experience. But yeah, so I mean, I went out that evening in the village with my friends, had a great steak and wine dinner like you do there. And then I woke up about 3 o'clock in the morning and I couldn't breathe. And I think it was because of the altitude. I literally could just not feel my lungs. So I kind of jumped out of bed, kind of ran out onto the balcony. I was heaving, trying to get some air back into my lungs. Couldn't do it. I was there for 2 or 3 minutes thinking that that was going to be my very last vision on Earth, and obviously the breathing did come back eventually, luckily, but I was a bit too freaked out to go back to sleep. So I ended up sort of sitting out under the moonlight. This was 2004 or 5 time, so there was no mobile phones. So all I had was this book in Spanish that I'd kind of picked up a while before. So I just started reading this book at 3 o'clock in the morning, and just stayed up for 3 or 4 hours reading this book. It was too hard for me, but I could just about follow along with the plot of the story. And then I kind of put the book that eventually got tired, went back to bed, didn't think anything of it. But the next day, what I realized was I had all these words popping into my mind, words that I hadn't known the day before. Words like el obispo, which is the bishop, which I never knew. But then somehow I knew the word, but I also knew what it meant. And I realized it was all because of this story that I'd been reading. So, long story short, I kept on reading, and within a few weeks, my Spanish had totally transformed because I just could understand so much more. I could also speak a lot better, and that then became the kind of the foundation of how I went on to learn the 8 languages that I know, and also the foundation of how I teach languages at StoryLearning.
And I know you've got a whole very unique methodology, and I'd love to dive into that a little bit more shortly here, because I think it's something that's going to be quite interesting to everyone. Before we do that, though, just another couple of parallels that we had in the early 2000s. When I first came to Argentina, I was here as a tourist on a tourist visa, and I couldn't speak a word of Spanish. And I enrolled in an intensive private Spanish school where I was studying 20 hours a week. There was about 4 of us in a class and 1 teacher, so it was 4 hours a day, 20 hours a week, and I did that for 10 weeks, and that allowed me to really hit the ground running. But a couple of other things I did was, during this process, I was doing a little bit like what you were doing with the book. I was reading the newspaper, and I had a dictionary with me, and I'd just be like highlighting words, and it was amazing how in a period of weeks that focus sort of compounded, and all of a sudden I had this vocabulary. So maybe that was a similar sort of thing to what you were doing. But the other thing that I found really interesting when we met and we're talking about our stories a little bit was, when I was in Argentina, I had to make ends meet. It was around about the time when I was starting my online business, and in parallel to starting my online business, I actually started a Spanish school for foreigners, where I was the receptionist who spoke a very limited amount of Spanish, but that was enough to be the receptionist, and I hired teachers, and we had foreigners coming through, and I eventually went on to sell that business. But it was my first sort of foray into an offline business, and it just happened to be that it was teaching Spanish, so another little overlap there. But anyway, tell us more about this interesting sort of methodology that you've got. I know you've got, is it like 14 different, at least 12 or 13 different languages that you teach, and I guess it all revolves around this methodology?
Yeah, so I mean, the best way to describe it is learning a language through stories. And most people remember what it's like to learn a language at school. It uses a method which is generally referred to as grammar translation, which means that you look, you kind of discover or learn about the language through the study of grammar. Sentences up on the blackboard, like we all remember from school, translate this, fill in the gaps, all that stuff. Learning lists of words, trying to memorize stuff for tests. That's how things are generally done. And yet, take a look around you. How many people do you know from school who actually speak another language? Virtually nobody. It doesn't work on a kind of mass scale. And so what we do is take the opposite approach and say, look, you don't learn a language by memorizing stuff or learning rules. You learn a language by surrounding yourself with the language, immersing yourself in the language, and then you let your brain, for want of a better word, soak it up. I mean, it's kind of not quite that simple, but in a way it also is. You've just got to give your brain the right information and it will start to learn by itself. And so what we do at StoryLearning is basically provide the structured environment for that to take place. So in order to learn through stories, you have to have simple stories to read. That's what we give you. We also give you the methodology that kind of goes along with that, so that we kind of help you along the way a bit by helping explain what you're reading, help the process along. And so what people tend to find is that it is more challenging at first than your kind of Duolingo, because we don't dumb things down. We kind of give you the method. We get you doing this method from the start. So it's more challenging at first. But what people find is that after as the weeks pass and the months pass, they realize that they've learned so much that the language is starting to kind of take shape in their mind in a way that it could never do if all you were doing was memorizing lists of words. So that's the fundamental approach that we take, and we've been building it out across many languages. I think we have courses now in 12 languages. We have books in over 20 languages, it's something that's really resonated with people. And from the business perspective, it's just really, once I realized that it was resonating with people, it's like, right, double down, do more of what's working, keep building it out. And that's what we've been doing now for years.
Something that's really interesting there that I'm not sure if you've come across or not is this whole idea of stories. It's the same method that people who teach memorization often use when they need to memorize a whole bunch of things or a sequence or something like this. They don't try to memorize one word after the next. They actually make a story out of it. So I think that's pretty interesting, and I think everyone could probably relate to little stories that they've heard or learnt when they were little, and just how vividly they stick in the mind. So it definitely doesn't surprise me that this has turned into such a home run of a business and of a learning methodology. In fact, I could have really done with brushing up on my Italian and my French. I was recently in Italy and France, and I've done a beginner course in each of those languages, but if I'd taken a wee bit of time and actually gone through some of your training prior to going on my trip, I probably would have found it a lot easier, because it felt like it took me a whole week to get to the point where I'd remembered everything, and just then right. I was leaving. So anyway, so I want to dive into some of the marketing. Like, you started off with a blog. Is that how the whole thing kicked off for you?
So this was summer 2013. I was living in the Middle East. I was managing a teaching center. I was kind of midway through my career as an English teacher, and I was really kind of missing that creative outlet, because I was a manager at this point, so I wasn't even teaching. So I was really looking for something to do creativity-wise, and I read this great book called The $100 Startup by Chris Guillebeau, where he basically talked about a bunch of people who are making money, earning a living with their passions. And in there was a story about a guy called Benny Lewis, who's a well-known language blogger, and he was earning a full-time living by blogging about languages. And I took one look at that. I went to his website and I thought, well, I can do that. If he can do that, why can't I? So that very day, I just sat down, I opened a free WordPress blog at wordpress.org, and I wrote my first blog post. So I just jumped on it and started blogging. And then from there, I just kept it up. I just did nothing but blog then from that point on for a couple of years.
Did you blog like weekly, daily, or how was that for you back then?
So I set myself a very strict output quota, which was one blog post a week. Every Sunday, 5 p.m., I would publish a blog post. And, right from the beginning, I was reading a lot, listening to a lot of podcasts on doing this stuff, on building online businesses. And it was quite clear to me that consistency was the number one thing. So I thought, I could do daily, but then the quality is going to be crap. So I've always taken the approach of, let's make the best blog post in the world on this topic, whatever it is, and then do that once a week. That was essentially my approach.
And how long were you doing that before you started to see some kind of attraction? Maybe getting ranked in Google, some traffic coming to your blog. Do you remember?
So for the first 3 or 4 months, like very little. I still remember one evening kind of logging onto WordPress and seeing that I had like 98 hits that day, and I kept kind of refreshing it, trying to get it up to 100, like not realizing that WordPress knew my IP address and wouldn't register it as a separate hit. And that was a big moment there when it got to 100 hits a day. My traffic growth, if you looked at it, it's one long slow line. There's no hockey stick. There's no like breakout moment like you see with YouTubers with this kind of crazy algorithm. It's been one very long slow curve of growth, I think the first sign of traction that I really remember was when I started guest posting. So I would do a guest post on some of the larger language blogs out there. And then I remember seeing how those guys would send an email about my post, and it would just send hundreds of people, or even thousands of people over to my website. I was like, wow. And that was my first kind of understanding of dynamics and how you could leverage relationships and other people's audiences to grow. So at that point on, then I was like, right, I'm guest blogging. So now I'm writing one post a week on my blog and then one guest post a week on someone else's blog, and just did the rounds, went through every single blog I could, essentially, getting in front of other people's audiences. And then, of course, without realizing it, I was also building a good backlink profile then at that point too, which now is something people spend silly money to do, but I was kind of doing it just through guest blogging. So, inadvertently...
You were doing it the way that Google always wanted people to do it, by creating good quality, unique content and getting it out there. Yeah,
it's exactly that. It was like... And I think so much of business is this, it's about just doing the next right thing, as they say in Alcoholics Anonymous. Like, just do the right thing, get the basics right, do it day after day, month after month, and just keep going. And what you find is, I remember someone said to me, just keep doing this for 5 years and you'll have a successful business. And that's exactly what happened.
Yeah. I mean, in your first couple of years, you would have had, if you were doing one blog post a week, 2 years in, you would have had 100 plus blog posts, and that doesn't include any of the guest posting as well. So, it's not that long into a business in the scheme of things, but a couple of years in, you're probably starting to build up traction. And how long did it take, or do you remember when you launched your first course in languages?
Yeah, so I remember about a year in to the blog, I was getting around 25,000 hits a month to the blog, which is, I don't know what that is really. It's hard to judge. It's not nothing, but it's also not a lot in quite a broad niche like this. But it was something. And then about a year in, I thought, okay, maybe it's time to start trying to sell something. Because again, I was listening to my podcasts and they were all saying, when you make your first $1, it's like everything changes. So I was like, okay, gotta start a course. And then it was around that time that there was a Jeff Walker product popped up in my inbox, which it wasn't his product launch formula. It was like what he calls a seed launch, which is how to launch a new product without any, pre-sell it and make it on the fly and all of that stuff. And I thought, well, that sounds good. It was $1,000, which was scary as hell. But I just had an educated guess that it was probably not BS and it wasn't a scam and it was probably going to help me. And it did. So I spent $1,000 on that. I made a course, sold it for like $2,500. So I kind of doubled my money. And then thought, this stuff works. And so then a few months later, then I took another course from somebody on how to create automated revenue. And then, and that was very useful learning really, because what I'd realized by that point, a year and a half or so in, was that if you're consistent with content, you'll build an audience. If you learn from people who are teaching this stuff, you will make steps forward. And then, so those principles I've kind of stuck to really, as the years have gone by, because I'm a huge proponent of learning and paying for training and getting mentorship and all of that. So I was just following the breadcrumbs, investing back into what I was doing, and it always worked.
A quick message now from the sponsor of today's show, which is Float Hosting. If you want to save 50% on your annual hosting, then head over to Float Hosting using the special link, which is thegrowthbooth.com/float. And using that link, you're going to see how you can save 50%, over $100 on your annual subscription to the most popular plan at Float Hosting. And because I own Float Hosting, I will make sure that you get well looked after. Now, back to the show.
And, it's really interesting. I've obviously really dived quite deep into a lot of what you're doing at StoryLearning. And by the way, if you're wondering what the website is, you can go over to StoryLearning.com, and Ollie's other website, which is another project that he's working on, is over at OllieRichards.co. So you can also check those out. Now, I'm talking about the content marketing. I see you popping up absolutely everywhere. You've got a YouTube channel with hundreds of thousands of subscribers, and your videos get a ton of views. Social media. How do you manage all of this with, what must be a pretty busy business there?
The secret is that I don't manage it. That's the only reason it works. So we have a pretty big team of people, but I was just actually explaining this on an earlier call today, like my approach to this. I've since I started expanding beyond the blog, I've had a very straightforward approach a very practical approach, I guess, to building new media properties, and that is essentially I make the decision that we're going to move into a different type of media. I go out myself and I learn it, so I take courses, I study it, I spend real time understanding how it works. I build the resources that I need to do it to the best of my ability, and I get traction with it. As soon as I get traction with it, then I bring on the people necessary to hand it off, and so that platform itself can kind of grow independently. And so really that's how we do things. We have for example, a Spanish YouTube channel. So my main channel is kind of all about languages and just in general, and I still do that myself because I really enjoy it. But we have another channel which is just Spanish videos, and that's managed completely independently of me. I don't even see what goes up on there, and all of that we're able to do because we've learnt the lessons from the main channel. And so what I do is I kind of hire then a team who can implement all of that stuff with input from me from time to time. But the principle is it's always managed. Every new project always needs a manager, it needs an owner, someone who's on the line to drive that forward. And then so if you kind of follow those principles and you make sure that everything has an owner, then there's really not much of a limit to how fast you can, or how big you can grow these things.
Yeah, I love that. I love the fact that you get the method dialed in, and then as soon as you can, you sort of hand it off to someone else. I mean, that's the exact same kind of approach to systematization that I take in my business, and I think it's a really, really easy way to do it. I often talk to people about if I'm trying to outsource something to someone, I master it myself, then I do it with the other person, and then I eventually hand the whole thing off to the other person. So it's like I do it, we do it, you do it.
I think you have to do it this way because creating content is an art form, and it's a blend of art and science. If you're going to do YouTube, for example, you really need to become an aficionado of the platform. You need to understand how YouTube works, what it means to create content for humans, what it means to design a thumbnail that people will click on, a title that draws people in, the first 30 seconds of the video that catch people's attention and give them a reason to keep watching. You're never going to be able to outsource this kind of creative artistry to anybody else. You can guide them through doing it and train them up, but you can't outsource the learning element of it. And so I think that as entrepreneurs, we have to take responsibility for really understanding what we're doing. And because it's like with sales, no one's ever going to be able to sell as well as you can. So I'm a big fan of like leveraging my. I mean, I obviously have like a natural affinity for this particular business that I'm in. So I kind of like think, well, I need the biggest leverage I can bring to the business is to leverage my kind of energy and passion for learning something, and then systematizing it, and then that's the approach.
Is it possible to apply the 80-20 rule to what you're doing with your marketing? And do you know where you sort of get the most bang for your buck? I mean, obviously you've got a podcast, you've got your blog, which is now like a decade old, practically. YouTube channel, obviously. Is there an 80-20 rule or something that you can apply? Do you know where you get the most bang for your buck?
I mean, yes, we do. It kind of depends where you're applying the 80-20 really, because I mean, in broad terms, like if you were to just dissect the business and say, okay, where does the money come from? Then in broad terms, you're growing audience through different types of media. You're capturing email addresses. You're deepening the relationship through email, and then making money through a kind of cycle of offers over a period of 1 to 3 years. I mean, that's essentially what it is, and then you can kind of skin that cat in a few different ways, and you can reach people. There's lots of different tactics for reaching people through different media, but the kind of principle is the same. I think like one of the things that I've really come to believe, and this is what I'm writing a lot about on ollyrichards.co, where I'm just kind of talking about my various ideas about business. Like I've developed a way of doing things which is very much kind of anti-direct response. And direct response marketing is, for those who don't know, is very much a system of how can we approach a cold audience and then make as much money as possible with a single transaction. And then you then follow that with a second and third transaction to customers. But it's very much based on the idea that you can use copy, targeting, persuasion techniques, scarcity, etc., to make sales. I spent years learning this stuff and applying it in different ways, but what I've learned is that by far the more powerful way to grow a business with real longevity and a real fan base is to think much more in terms of an ecosystem and world building than a kind of linear direct response model where it's like step 1 and then step 2, then step 3, and then step 4. And so I really take this concept of world building to heart. And this is a Dan Kennedy concept. And it's the idea that essentially, rather than having your kind of classic value ladder where you sell the kind of the tripwire, then the $100 course and the $1,000 course and then the $25,000 mastermind, and in theory people will go from one step to the next. Instead, you have a very well articulated, strong brand. So in our case, this is learn a language with stories. It's not for everybody, but for the kind of people who are attracted to that, it's like crack cocaine. They've tried everything to learn a language, hasn't worked. They find this, it's like, man, this is what I've been waiting for my whole life. What we want to do then is not to keep sort of pounding on them, trying to sell them more stuff, but rather to create an entire ecosystem of offers that are all based around this brand. And then through your email marketing, through your content marketing, you keep coming back, you stay top of mind, and then you kind of give them the offer or the invitation to keep spending through offers that are cycled through at different times. And this creates a scenario where people never really feel sold to. They don't really feel like we're putting pressure on them. But because they like the brand so much and what we do, they just keep coming back and spending a lot of money. Not necessarily in the first month or even the first year, but over a period of, 1 to 5 years, can spend quite a lot of money. And so this is kind of how, over time, we found that the business really, really compounds and snowballs as our audience size grows.
I think a lot of what you're talking about here is the synergies that you've been able to build into your business, and by building these synergies, by having a whole portfolio of different products you can offer to people, you're offering them solutions to their problems. And I think that's perhaps one of the reasons why it doesn't feel like selling. I know that in my own business, in my own experience in the online business space, we've got Carpsy, which is a e-commerce platform. If people want to sell physical products online, they can use that. But then we've also got a hosting company, and these are not things that we have to push out on people. They're more sort of like, hey, if you're doing this, here's an option, and it might be a good option for you, rather than buy. This is the best. It's more magnetic.
Yeah, exactly. That's exactly it. And if I had a sort of software portfolio like you do, I'd be thinking about it in exactly the same way. You don't really need to sell anything, because you can just create the content you're creating and then just kind of drop who was it? I think it was Russell Brunson used to refer to this as marinating. So you were just going to marinate the different things you offer within the things that you say. So you talk about you might be teaching something around e-commerce, and then you just drop in the fact that, oh yeah, and I do this on Cartsy or whatever it may be, and or you just kind of drop in the name of your hosting company, and then it just becomes the next logical step for people to actually go ahead and do that. And then every now and again, maybe 2 or 3 times a year, you might come in with a specific offer or something, so people who are procrastinating, give them a reason to get off the fence. But it is only very occasionally, and so you kind of maintain goodwill whilst also allowing people to really kind of go deep on your whole world.
I think this is a strategy that works particularly well when you're able to look at the business through a longer lens. And to your point earlier, you spoke about consistency, sticking with it, keeping it simple, keeping the basics right, keeping going. And when you do that and you're doing it over a period of time, you can drop your products in there, and little by little, things start to grow. And I know that I experienced this with our hosting company. One day I woke up and I was like, holy crap, this has grown pretty big now. We've got a real company on our hands, whereas when we started, we were literally just offering it out there without thinking too much about, if we were going to make money from it or anything. It was just a solution that we had, that we used ourselves, and wake up one morning after a few years and, oh, wow, you've got a massive business. I want to ask you something else. I think it's a trap that a lot of entrepreneurs fall into. It seems like you were able to stay pretty focused when you were building StoryLearning. Was that difficult to stay focused? Because it also sounds like you were aware of lots of different courses and training programs out there, but you were able to keep focused, putting your blog posts out, building the audience, building that foundation.
I mean, I'm a pretty stubborn person, so once I set my mind to it, I do tend to kind of carry on. But also, I was at a stage of life where I really, really wanted this to work. So I was living in the Middle East in a job that I was just not enjoying, with very few prospects. My wife was pregnant. I I did not want to have a baby in Egypt. There was all of these things kind of swirling around in my mind, and what this kind of represented was a kind of hope in a way. And so I think that was what kind of made me get home from work and then sit up for 2 or 3 hours writing a blog post. I mean, I wouldn't do that now. I think this is one of those scenarios where if you've got youth on your side, it is an asset because you can just do more than you can when you're, when you have a family and you're maybe not as young as you used to be. So there was a lot of, energy involved in creating this. But also, I definitely did find that it became challenging to hold things together once it got to a certain scale. I mean, for the first, I mentioned earlier how for the first 2 years I was blogging very consistently. That definitely started to slip after 2 years when I started to spend my time building courses instead. I found that I would go for a few weeks without posting blog posts, and it did really start to slip. It was then actually, a year or two, I think, until we kind of sat down and said, right, we've got to not let the content slip here, and so we actually brought someone in to focus on writing up and posting the various blog posts. I think we sort of shifted to getting blog posts commissioned rather than me writing them. But there was a kind of,
I can imagine that must have been
that
must have been a complete game changer when all of a sudden you were not the guy that had to do the writing. You could still do it if you enjoyed it, but it wasn't all dependent on you.
It didn't feel like it at the time because it was expensive and
right.
Traffic. The thing about the SEO game is that traffic takes time to come through. But looking back on it in retrospect, it was a really key moment because now we get north of 1 million hits a month on the blog, and that is all because we've managed to systematize content. So these things, you have to try them, and then you have to learn how to do them properly, make mistakes and all of that, and only then and later does it start to really compound.
You mentioned something there about this story of adversity. You were in Egypt, your partner was pregnant, and you needed to get this going. Actually, when you said that, it reminded me a lot of when I was in Buenos Aires in 2005. It was, so I was here with, because my wife was here. She wasn't my wife at the time, but I was out here visiting her, and it was either get this online business making money, or you are going back to New Zealand and you're going back into the rat race, and you're not going to be able to travel and do all these other cool things that you want to do. So I also had this burning desire. It was almost like succeed with this and you survive, and your dreams will survive. Or if you don't make this work, then you're not going to have any of those things that you want. And I think that's an amazingly powerful motivator. It's the most powerful one that I've ever had. Certainly my children as well, now more recently, but back then when I was starting out, I felt like a rat in a corner that was fighting its way out, and one way or another I was going to do anything to make it work. And I think that certainly helped with my focus and ability to sort of get results early on there. So where are you going to go with Story Learning from here? And also olierichards.co, what's the plan of attack? You've built this amazing business. Where to from here?
Yeah, well, we actually have a fairly big vision for what we're doing with Story Learning. It was interesting because I found kind of going into 2019, 2020, I really didn't have much of a vision. I didn't know where the company was heading, and I actually found myself getting quite dispirited with the whole thing. And so I spent quite a lot of time working with mentors to try and figure this out. And it was one of the best things I ever did because it helped me sort of understand what is possible for the business. And so I mean, in one sense, we're kind of continuing to grow it the way that we have been, but we're also trying to build more of an ecosystem of companies within that. So we are. We recently invested in a tutoring company, so you can get one-on-one lessons with a tutor. We're building out a certification program, so we were actually starting to train people as teachers. And so what we're doing is kind of using our core audience that we've built at Story Learning to build equity in other places. So with the tutoring company, that's a kind of software recurring revenue-based play. The certification is much more kind of high ticket. And so we have a self-publishing company as well that we're trying to take more mainstream. So it's essentially focusing on growing the main company while then reinvesting income from that into kind of parallel ventures, which can kind of grow the overall pie. Because there's a kind of one rationale for doing this is that it actually adds a lot of value to the sale price of the company, but I don't really care about that. It's more because I just think it's a cool thing to do. So I just get, once I get an idea in my mind, it's kind of impossible to drop, really. So that is really kind of 3 to 5 year vision. And then over on olierichards.co, essentially I'm just documenting this. I'm writing about it because one of the things that I found so difficult in my journey is actually just having a clear vision from and understanding what's possible and what I should be thinking about as I'm growing a company. So I really want to write about that and get stuff down on paper. I've just written a whole case study about storytelling and how it works. And I'm basically a teacher at heart. I've always taught. That's what I've always done. And so when it comes to business, I just have this kind of inner desire to just sort of teach it and write about it. And so I kind of created that to just be a kind of a home for me to write about the things that I've been learning.
That sounds amazing, and I'm really interested in watching this space because what you've built out already with story learning is absolutely amazing. I'm a user of it. I think it's brilliant. And I'm going to be using more and more of it because I just realized after my recent trip to Europe that I needed to have brushed up, and I should have done that in advance. But anyway, I know where to go now. So I would absolutely recommend that everyone checks these websites out. A couple of thoughts to sort of wrap up here. A few things that you've mentioned which really hammered home with me. I think your story and your success is not the result of a magic bullet. It's rather toiling away with a single focus. You didn't have that hockey stick growth. You said that you experienced a sort of a long, consistent growth curve. And I think consistency was one of the real keys there, that ability to stay focused, keep toiling away, get the basics right, keep things simple, and just keep going. And I think you mentioned also that a couple of the principles that you've really lived by with your business is learning from other people who have been and done what you want to do, and then applying what you learned with consistency to your business. And I think that's something that everyone listening to this can take away with them. So, Ollie, thank you so much for taking some time out of your day here. I'm really excited about getting this episode out to our subscribers, and look forward to being able to catch up with you in person once again. I should have mentioned this at the start, but we really hit it off. Ollie ended up coming over and having dinner with me and my family, and we spoke for hours on end about marketing and businesses, and I learned a ton from Ollie, and I think you will as well by going to his website. So Ollie, thanks for taking the time here.
Man, it's been a real pleasure. Always great to chat, and I look forward to catching up again, whether that's in Buenos Aires or down here in the UK. We'll have to do it again soon.
Awesome. That's a wrap for this episode, guys. You know where to find us. It's at thegrowthbooth.com. This is episode number 45. You can also find us on YouTube, on Apple Podcasts, on Spotify, or wherever it is that you like to consume your content. Just find or look for episode number 45, and I will see you in the next episode of The Growth Booth.